Well, good evening. Welcome to Viking Preparedness. I'm Pastor Joe Fox. I had a friend post on my board a dilemma he has, and I think that many of you may have this similar situation, and that is this. He lives in Europe, and he has no alternate location that he can flee to if his primary location, which is his home, becomes untenable. Now, it's not for lack of trying. His relatives all live in the same basic area that he does, so even if he could go to their house, it's probably not going to get him out of the trouble that is causing him to flee. But you know, something could happen, his house could burn down, so he would need an alternate location. He's tried storing supplies at some of their houses. The people think he's crazy, and survivalism, preparedness evidently isn't really big in his country. And the house where he did store things, they used up all his supplies. They just didn't see it as important. Other relatives live in flats, apartments that are so small there's no room for him to store anything. And he's like, hey, what am I going to do if something terrible happens in Europe? They're going to close down all the borders. I'm not going to be able to go to another country. What can I do? I'm stuck. Well, a lot of you have written me emails, and I've read on discussion boards and things like that. You know, the biggest mistake is some of you all say, I'm not going anywhere. You know, I've built my little paradise here on my ranch or my house or, you know, my bug out retreat that I live on, which is always a good idea to live at your bug out location. But you need an alternate. You need a contingency, and you need an emergency location, unless you're just willing to die at your location, and then you're not very much of a survivalist. You're not really into preparedness if you're like, well, if this house goes, I'm going with it. Okay, if that's your attitude, you can turn off this video now. But if you truly do want to survive, if you think that God has something for you to do, and maybe He wants you to take some steps, then let's think about this. Instead of focusing, it's starting to sound like my last video, instead of focusing on what you can't do, let's look at what you can do. The first thing that you can do is move. Everybody, pretty much, unless you live in a communist country, can move. I don't have the money to move, Joe. Oh, okay. You know what? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. If you wanted to move, you could move. It's all about choices and consequences and what's going to happen. I have a pretty good friend who lives in Los Angeles. He knows that's a terrible location, but his brain is kind of trapped there, and he honestly makes excuses about how it's going to work out for him if things go bad. And I'm telling you, it's not. It's going to be horrible. And so consider moving. I know the economy's bad. I know you're lucky to have the job you have now, and you may not have another job if you move. Okay, you're betting your life on that. So if that's good with you, then that's okay. What else can you do? Well, I don't know in Europe if you can rent storage facilities, but that would be an option. You could rent a storage facility, store supplies next to your relative that doesn't get it, and then maybe, you know, at least they won't eat your supplies. Here's the deal. Here's what you have to get into your mind. Picture any scenario you want. You know, there's a plague, there's a war here at your house. There's a natural disaster, that comet that everybody's talking about strikes the earth. You know, things are terrible, and so you go into survival mode. You put your preparedness plans into place, and then something happens to your home, to your homestead, to your farm. A tornado takes it away, a fire takes it away, the radioactive cloud comes moving through, and it's like if you stay there, you're toast. And so you have to flee. You have to, first of all, realize the possibility. You may have to flee to live. Okay, well, if that happened today, where would you go? Because you're going to go somewhere. I mean, you should have an immediate plan now. You can come up with your immediate plan in the next 2 hours. Where are we going to go if all of a sudden we have to flee our home? Take some steps towards that. Maybe you could go put a cache in. Maybe you could go just put some money in an ammo can and bury it where you're going to go. My wife and I, when we first got into preparedness, our plan was to take our supplies and run to the woods and live in the woods. That's not a good plan, but it was a plan. It wasn't like, oh dear me, we're just going to roll over here, suck our thumb and die. And so that's an option. Maybe rent a place. If you have relatives who don't get it, or they're a little unsure of storing their supplies, maybe you could put it in footlockers and lock the footlockers and say, hey, can you keep this in your garage? Your relatives aren't preparing. Okay, well then you're going to have to prepare for them too if you're going to live in their house after something happens. I mean, these are all options. Instead of saying, well, they don't get it, they don't store food, they would only eat my food, Okay, well, then what are you going to do about that? You're going to live with them, you're going to have food for them, you're going to have a plan to get more food or produce more food. You're going to have to do something, is my point. And so start thinking in positive ways, start taking positive actions. Consider moving. If you are living in a populated center, my wife told me I should make a video on these flash mobs and these big there's mob violence right now going on in England, in a few cities. There's violence that just went on in Wisconsin, and there's violence that's going on in Philadelphia. I just heard their mayor speak on the radio. Hey, the cities are going to do nothing but get worse. If you live in a city, you need to move out of there. If you live in the country, I live in the country, you need to have a plan. You need to have a couple plans. You saw my PACE video, I hope, on where you're going to go if your place becomes untenable. Stop thinking about what you can't do. Stop thinking about all the restrictions, which you do have to consider, but stop focusing on them and start focusing on what you can do to improve your situation. And a good place to start is, what would I do? Honest to goodness, what would I do right now if my house burnt down and we were in some WROL situation? What would we do? Where would we go? Maybe start with that and improve that plan, that immediate plan. Something else you may want to consider is big moves. I've been researching the Southern Hemisphere. It's not outside of the realm of possibilities for you to move to another country. Are there problems? Yes. Are there issues? Yes. I personally think we live in the best country on earth. We have a lot of problems here, but we live in the best nation. I would not want to live in another one, but that does not stop me from considering the possibilities. Consider the possibilities, open your mind, think outside the box, and start looking for solutions to your problems. Don't focus on all the negatives. Don't get weighed down on what you can't do. Think about what you will do. Think about what you can do, and then start taking some steps. Please come up with a secondary place, at least a secondary place for you to stay, you and your family to stay, if your current location becomes untenable. Work on that this week. God bless you, and I'll see you out there.